Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Avorion episode 58. I'm Enigmius, and today the carrier is going to get elongated. We were talking in the last episode about how I had done some work on that profile on the side of the front end here, and I liked the shape of it, and I wanted to duplicate that shape on the back side of the ship as well, only I wanted to rescale it, make it a little bit larger, but otherwise preserve the curve, which is a little bit difficult to do without using the copy and paste because it's very finicky, to say the least. So before I finish the front section, and specifically the sides of the front section, I decided that I would start doing the framework to get to the back portion of the ship so that I can copy and paste the profile that we've got on the front, and then I can finish off the front side whenever I want to. I can cover up that profile. It doesn't matter. I won't need to get to it in order to be able to work on the back side as well. So that's basically what I'm doing, is I'm creating one of the main structural elements. I want to call them beams. It's probably, I mean, if you were looking at it when it's done, it would be a little bit more than a beam, but you get the idea. Basically extending from the front all the way to the back. And you can see what I did was I put a nice soft curve on it, which for me, I mean, there's a time and place to have just straight lines. I tend to prefer things a little bit curved. That's probably not a shocking revelation at this point, but you kind of, it comes with the territory. I think you have an opportunity to pick and choose how you want to put things together, and once you've got a bit of practice creating this kind of thing without having to do it and redo it necessarily, it feels almost like I would be selling the design short if I didn't implement a bit of a curve going back. And it also fits with the rest of the ship as it's coming together on the front end, and we'll continue that theme in the back end as well. So we got the main curve extending from the front towards the back, and now we're just kind of extending it out to the sides a little bit. I want to make it about as wide as the central portion of the front end that we did in the very first episode, and that way it just kind of, it's important for me looking at it that it has a certain amount of substance to it. I wanted to make sure that when the ship is done and you're looking at it, especially with the plan to have a cavity in the middle of the ship, an open section that's not you know, very dense structurally, to have it believable that the ship can actually take a bit of punishment without being cut in half. So by making this a little bit wider, continuing with that whole sort of curve thing, we've done the curve from front to back, and now we're doing the curve from side to side, just kind of a gradual sloped curve, and matching the profile that we've got on the front end. There's this section here that's actually flat. It's not a compound curve, it's just a curve, just like we've got at the very top ridge of this section. Kind of goes back on its own, and then it resumes kind of a sloped little bit there before the whole thing is basically, the profile is all said and done, and then we can kind of close it up a little bit on the sides. This actually went together a lot better than I was anticipating, which is nice for a change, because sometimes quite often it goes together, and I'm happy with it. It's more or less what I had in mind. You've seen also that there are plenty of times where it goes together and I'm just not quite happy with it, and we redo it, we tweak it, we adjust it until we're happy with it. But this was a fairly straightforward process, and what you're seeing me do here with the removing and the replacing isn't so much adjusting it because I wasn't happy with the way that it looked. It's redoing a section of it because it was one of those cases where I clicked a little bit too early when I was placing one of the blocks, and it wound up the fraction of a block out of alignment. I figured out that that's what's been my problem in a lot of cases, where things just go out of alignment by an amount that you can't create on your own. And it's because when you mouse over a face on a block, when you've got the match feature turned on, it doesn't immediately snap to that face. It almost kind of like shifts into place, and if you don't give it enough time to line up properly and properly match the face like you would expect it to be, you get that little wee tiny bit that was shifted ever so slightly out of place. It wasn't quite where it was supposed to be yet, and that's the nature of the problem. Having recognized that has made absolutely no difference to how often that it happens to me, because it's really just a very accidental thing, and I'm expecting it to be in place, and I click, and I don't even realize that it wasn't quite there yet until I see that little wee tiny gap somewhere along the line, and then the only way to fix it is to pull everything apart up to where that gap is, and then figure out where the misalignment was, and then reconstruct it with everything properly aligned after that. So there was a little bit of time spent correcting something along those lines, but by and large this came together pretty well. It came together fairly quickly and fairly easily. You see, I just highlighted all of the blocks and merged everything so we can kind of keep the block count low as we go, and the end result, as you look at it, is very much what I was hoping that it would be. It's got some heft to it, it's got some width and some bulk to it, but it's still just a relatively small structural element that's extending, that will be holding the ship together between the front and the back. Now you'll notice where the curve that we did stops, there was a flat section that was still sticking out from the piece that we had placed originally, that we were building on top of. And I thought about it, and I had a few different options. I could have redone the curve so that it went all the way to the end of that flat section, which, I mean, you saw all the stuff that we put in there. It wasn't really an appealing option to go to that length in order to kind of make things work. Another option would have been to remove that flat section, that long beam, but it runs basically the entire length of the ship. And there were apparently certain aspects that were attached to it that weren't attached to anything else, so removing it would have taken other things with it, so that wasn't really an option. So I decided that I would put this scoop, another one of my vent scoops, whatever you want to call them, on the back of the ship, and have it kind of take up this space where that flat piece is, and just kind of taper off, kind of curve off towards the back, and then it'll probably curve back around and underneath and become a part of the main sort of structure of the back end of the ship. So that's what I decided to do, was do this thing. And it was a case here where, again, I didn't want to go to, it's not even a big deal, but at the time it felt like going to the trouble to go and get an elliptical profile that's accurate, geometrically accurate, and all those things. It was good enough for me in this case to create the curve that I had in mind on the top, and then instead of driving myself nuts trying to duplicate that on the underside so that it looks proper when it's done, I just did the copy paste and I flipped it over and kind of attached it so that it's symmetrical, and I don't have to worry about looking at it and feeling like it just looks sloppy and has to be redone. But it's also not a perfect ellipse, it's just a shape, and it's a shape that for this particular part of the ship I'm happy with. And again, it comes down to I had something in mind and I created something in the process of trying to match that, and it came out pretty good. It came out pretty close to what I had in mind. What gave me, I wouldn't even say it was a bit of trouble, but it was a more challenging thing that I really gave a whole lot of thought to, was this back end and how we're doing this. Again, a soft curve. It's a compound curve, so it's curving from side to side across the top, and then it's also curving from the top towards the back, curving down. Obviously, you see it's pretty straightforward where the curves are going. And the whole idea here is it has to end up somewhere. And the foresight sometimes is a little bit tricky to get the hang of, and you kind of just start doing things and then you just go, And this is around the part where what I was doing stopped working. Everything up to this point, roughly this point here, with the shapes and the profiles and everything, I was happy with and the way that it was going. But then it started to just get kind of weird. And you can actually see the different textures and how everything is going together. It sort of accentuates those panels that we're creating. You can see like bands of polygons that are kind of very uniform, kind of stretching around. And it just kind of gave it this weird thing. And I wasn't satisfied that it was the same kind of curve that I really wanted on the back end, even though all we were doing is sort of just a continuation of the curve that we had been following along the top. So you can see we removed a bunch of it and started putting some more blocks in place, a little less aggressively on the downward curvature. So we're basically ending up a little bit farther back than we were with the original pass. And this to me was, I mean, it could go either way. Looking at it again, you can see it's a fairly abrupt transition from the very gradual curve across the top to that one point where it just suddenly turns and kind of drops off. Maybe not a bad thing, maybe not the best thing. It could go either way. But in this case, I think as long as the other things that we do with this particular part of the ship make sense and kind of follow the idea that I had in mind, then it's not going to be that big of a deal to have the back end falling off like that. It may actually be the ideal profile, but time will tell. I try not to say too much about these things being especially good unless I feel that they're really truly especially good. Like that part from the long beam. I really like that. It's headed in the right direction, but we've got some weird transitions and some weird curves going on because this is basically sitting on top of the back end of the ship. And I don't want it to look like it's just a piece that's sitting on top of the back end of the ship. I want it to flow in such a way that it becomes part of a larger structure and actually looks like it's flowing into that larger structure as opposed to simply something that's being sat on top of it. So we have, normally looking at a shape like this, I would be doing the same thing on the underside as I did on top. We would basically be following the same sort of profile, just inverted, and it would come together at the back and it would be symmetrical, and that would be the shape that I would be working with. And that's quite often been the case when I've done similar kinds of things. But in this case, I actually want the sides and the underside to also start curving down towards the backside so that we get that flow that I'm looking for. And you can see now that's exactly what we're doing, is we're using the inside corner blocks as the starting point to do that transition from basically coming straight back to flowing down, whereas previously in other examples of this kind of a profile, we would have it start flowing up. So it's taking a little bit of time, mostly in the sense of the center part. Like if you're looking at it from the side, and the midway point between the top and the bottom is where that transition happens. It's where that transition starts, where it starts going down instead of up. So that's where I'm trying to make sure that I'm paying attention, make sure that it's going where we want it to go, and then also make sure that everything else that comes after that as we're working our way towards the back is pretty much in line with what I had in mind. And given that I have like I've said in the past, sometimes I have a very clear idea of what I want, and other times I have a general idea, and this is very much a case where I had a general idea. And as I was working on it and sort of looking at it and you know, spinning around and stuff like that, I start to get certain ideas and it starts to evolve until we get to the point where we're at now, where it's all coming together in sort of this weird sort of structural bit. And this is where I didn't really feel like I was starting to make mistakes, but I was starting to feel tired because this is, it's challenging. And that's the great thing about it, is that it's challenging and the penalty for failure is nothing. There's no penalty for failure except maybe a bit of lost time, because this is creative. There's not even a cost that we have to worry about here, and nobody's shooting at us. So we're just going to carry on precisely where we leave off here in the next episode, so that you have an opportunity to see how this top section is going to finish off towards the back, and then we'll start working on the back structural elements so that we can do what we originally wanted to do, which is copy the profile from the front to the back. So if you want to be notified about the next and future videos in this and other series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information box below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.